San Diego may be going back to the drawing board for expanding the convention center downtown. A ruling against the funding plan won't be appealed. I'm Eric Anderson. That story tonight on KPBS Evening Edition. Plus, word of a San Diego connection to the Islamic State in Syria. A former San Diegan is killed while fighting for the militant group.
I'm Amita Sharma. The convention center expansion is one of many items on Todd Gloria's agenda these days. We'll talk with the council president about the minimum wage debate and other issues at City Hall. And while people in Napa are cleaning up after Sunday's big quake, we'll take a look at how San Diego's buildings would fare.
A big rally today by supporters of a Marine veteran being held in a Mexican prison. They're hoping for attention from Mexico's president. And as classes begin at local colleges, we'll have a look at what schools are doing here to prevent sexual assaults. KPBS Evening Edition starts now. Good evening and thanks for joining us. Dwayne Brown is off tonight. News reports say that a former San Diegan who joined the Islamic State militia group has been killed in Syria. NBC says Douglas MacArthur McCain was fighting in a battle between two Syrian opposition groups. McCain was born in Illinois. He lived in Minnesota before coming here to San Diego. San Diego City College confirms McCain studied there at one point, but they're not saying when. McCain reportedly attended a Somali mosque in City Heights, but mosque leaders tell KPBS they don't recall seeing him at services. The State Department has not confirmed McCain's identity so far. Last week, an Islamic State fighter killed American journalist James Foley. Some big news today about the city's plan to expand the San Diego Convention Center. KPBS Metro reporter Taryn Mento joins us to talk about this latest development after a judge struck down the project's funding plan earlier this month. Taryn, what did the City Council decide to do?
Eric, the City Council voted unanimously not to appeal the ruling. Now that means the city would have to put the current funding plan before voters or find another way to fund it, or come up with an entirely different expansion plan. So the options are plenty at the moment. Any indication of which way the city is leaning? In a statement, Mayor Kevin Faulconer said he's met with various parties, including the Chargers and members of the hotel industry, to discuss other plans, and he emphasized the importance of public input. But specific details on the immediate next steps weren't provided.
Now, we're looking at an artist's rendering of the proposed expansion. Any chance that an expansion plan could be scrapped altogether?
That seems like an unlikely outcome at this point. Both the City Council and the Mayor have largely supported the expansion because it could create jobs and draw larger conventions to the area. So the real discussion will be about what's the best plan to do that.
And we'll be hearing much more about it in the days to come. KPBS Metro reporter Taryn Mento. Thanks, Taryn. Earlier today, City Council President Todd Gloria sat down with Amita Sharma to discuss the convention center expansion and other issues.
The San Diego City Council took a break from its summer break for a special meeting today on whether to appeal a ruling on the convention center expansion funding. Council President Todd Gloria joins me to talk about the city's response to the ruling and a full agenda of hot-button issues facing San Diego when he and his colleagues return from vacation next month. As you well know, the 4th District Court of Appeal turned down the city's plan to finance the convention center expansion through a levy on local hotels. Short of appealing this ruling, what options does the city have to get this expansion financed?
Well, if we choose not to appeal, which we'll make that decision later today, we could put this before the voters as soon as June of 2016 for their approval or consideration, or we can go back to the drawing table and try and come up with either a new financing plan for the existing project or try and envision an entirely new project that may or may not include things like a new Charter Stadium.
Make the case for this convention center expansion. Why is it needed?
Well, that's an easy thing to do. We are currently in a position of turning away a year's worth of business from San Diego. These are conventions and events that want to be here, but we can't accommodate them because our facility is not large enough. The best example, of course, is Comic-Con, who have grown with us, but have said very clearly they need additional space or they may go somewhere else. The other reason we want to do this is that it creates thousands of permanent and construction jobs. It improves waterfront access and creates a new park for downtown San Diego. There are a multitude of reasons why this project was able to get through a lengthy public review process and gain the support of the City Council, and that's why it's so disappointing that we've hit this roadblock with the district court opinion.
Let's move on to the minimum wage. Mayor Faulkner, actually the City Council overrode Mayor Faulkner's veto of the minimum wage hike, which would go to $11.50 per hour by 2017. Now there's an effort underway to put the issue to voters. There are echoes here of what happened with Barrio Logan, the Barrio Logan plan, where the City Council approved the plan. It was put to citywide voters and ultimately defeated. Is this the ultimate in democracy, or is it an attempt to circumvent the Democratic majority on the City Council?
It's a perversion of democracy, and it's not just the Barrio Logan plan. We've seen this with medical marijuana dispensaries, commercial linkage fees, big box retailers, and more. And I think, or I fear, that we'll continue to see in the future. Essentially what you have are people who are wealthy enough to try and purchase the results that they couldn't get through the normal democratic process. The council has made a position or taken a particular tact, and we are elected by the people, and these folks simply see an opportunity to pay a couple $100,000 to some signature gatherers and overturn that result. I hope that that won't happen in this case with the minimum wage. We have too many people that are counting on an increase in their wages because they don't make enough to live here. And it would be, I think, a very sad day if a few very wealthy individuals could purchase the result that they could not get through the democratic process.
As you know, the signature gathering process has become very heated with allegations of harassment, distortion, even signature or petition theft. Where do you think the public stands on hiking the minimum wage?
Well, I know that they're very supportive of it. I know that both the research, where we know the poll recently showed that 63% of San Diegans support the $11.50 an hour that the council has adopted, and then just through my own personal experience. I can't go anywhere in this town without someone coming up to me and just saying, thank you. Thank you. I'm not making enough to live in this city. This would mean another tank of gas a week for me, and you don't know how important that would be for me individually. These stories are what's reflected in those poll results, and why I think that folks ultimately, even if this were to be put on the ballot, will be successful in enacting it, because it's just so simply hard to keep a roof over your head and food on the table.
Okay, but as we saw with the Barrio Logan plan, public support doesn't necessarily translate into voter support.
Correct.
I mean, in terms of people actually getting up and going to the polls. How do supporters of the minimum wage hike get these people to the polls?
Well, we would have to mount a campaign. But I think importantly, why we don't want to go that way is that if there are enough signatures collected, this would put the proposal on ice for 2 years. And that means that those increases that are forecasted, the earned sick days that have been enacted, would not go into effect. And that means that for low-wage workers who are currently having a hard time making ends meet would receive no relief for at least 2 years. And that's why we don't want to repeal this. I would encourage your viewers not to sign the petition. But if we do go that way, we'll have to mount a campaign. And I think that's probably one of the best arguments for not signing the petition. I think San Diegans need a few or less pieces of political mail in their mailbox and a few less commercials on television. But if that's what we have to do, that's what we'll have to do. But this is a cause that's worth fighting for.
Council President Todd Gloria, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
The president of Mexico was welcomed in Sacramento today by protest signs. Some of the protesters were demanding the release of Marine veteran Andrew Tamarisi, who's been in a Mexican prison since late March after crossing the border with guns in his car.
He's not a criminal. He's somebody who made a mistake. He was in violation of Mexico's gun laws for about 60 seconds, but his guns are all legally registered, and he was just trying to get back into this country. He missed the U-turn. I would like to ask Governor Brown on this trip, to raise this issue with the President of Mexico. And I think if he could get the President of Mexico to actually announce the release of Sergeant Andrew Tamarisi, Americans would be a lot more open to whatever he came here to talk to us about.
Tamarisi's case is currently working its way through the Mexican legal system. So far, neither the governor nor President Peña Nieto have talked about Tamarisi. Instead, they've been talking about collaboration, and the Mexican president thanked California lawmakers for everything they've done favoring migrants. This is his first official visit to the United States. State lawmakers have passed a bill prompted by a corruption case in the South Bay. The bill makes it illegal for top school officials to raise money for school board candidates. A pay-to-play scandal forced 4 Sweetwater Union High School District board members out of office recently. The bill was written by Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez. It's waiting for the governor's signature. A statewide ban on plastic shopping bags has just one more chance in the state assembly. It fell 4 votes short last night, but it can be brought up one more time before the legislature winds up business later this week. The proposed law would also require a 10-cent fee for paper bags. California is on the brink of becoming the first state to define when yes means yes while investigating sexual assaults on college campuses. The Senate is considering a bill requiring investigators to find out whether affirmative consent was granted. And that means a person has to say yes to sexual contact. Silence or lack of resistance does not count as a yes, and neither does consent given while someone is drunk. Earlier this summer, a state investigation criticized San Diego State University for its sexual assault policies. KPBS reporter Angela Carone takes a look at how SDSU has adapted since the investigation and how sexual assault impacts this college community.
SDSU students were out and about this past weekend celebrating the start of school. There were some organized events on campus and some party buses picking students up so they don't drink and drive. Administrators at SDSU spent the summer getting ready for their students' arrival. That includes beefing up the school's sexual assault policies after a state investigation found many of those policies inadequate. Sexual assaults are common on college campuses, and freshmen are particularly at risk, especially during their first few months of school. That period is called the red zone, says Campus Police Captain Joshua Mays.
I think the transition from high school to college is obviously a shock to anyone. There's a lot of transition that happens, a lot of learning that happens. You know, mom and dad aren't there telling them what to do. They don't have a high school teacher making them, report to school.
And there's the college party scene.
The vast majority of our sexual assaults that occur here, alcohol is a factor. We typically see that one or both, the victim and or the suspect, have been either consuming alcohol or alcohol was involved in or a factor in the overall sexual assault.
Since 2010, 65 sexual assaults have been reported to campus police. Of the 40 assaults in which we know the age of the victim, more than half were 18 or 19 years old. But these numbers represent only a sliver of the problem. Most victims don't report assaults to police. SDSU also has a large commuter population, so assaults in, say, Pacific Beach, where a lot of students live, aren't reflected in those campus numbers.
Confirming the number of assaults might be hard, but critics say that education and prevention are exactly what universities should be doing well, and most aren't. The state audit pointed out that SDSU does not adequately train its faculty to respond to a student who might come to them.
Gail Mendez works with student survivors of sexual assault. She's an attorney with a local rape crisis center. She says too often faculty just don't know what to say.
Probably the most common fact scenario that I get is a victim coming to me and they've already reported the sexual assault to a faculty member, and that faculty member is not the Title IX coordinator, and they tell the student, they engage in victim blaming. They tell the student maybe it was just a misunderstanding. They discourage the student from going forward, telling them how hard it will be. And so that we know that the first person a victim talks to is a pivotal point of conversation.
Jessica Rento is the Title IX coordinator at SDSU. Sexual assaults fall under Title IX, which bans sex discrimination in education. She hopes to mandate training for all staff this year, but that has to be negotiated with the union. Rento has already overhauled freshman orientation, which the audit criticized for skimming the topic of sexual assaults. Last year's presentation was 5 minutes long. This year, it was just over a half hour and included a celebrity-studded PSA.
If she doesn't consent, or if she can't consent, It's rape.
There are also plans for a women's center staffed by a rape crisis advocate. The audit has forced SDSU to take a hard look at its policies, but advocates like Jeff Buchholz wonder why it's taken so long for universities to deal with the problem.
As someone who's been on this campus since I was a graduate student, starting in 2003, so over a decade on the campus, I was asking for this, for a lot of the things that came out in the audit, I was lobbying for in 2003, and not alone. Faculty that I worked with in women's studies and sociology, other graduate students and survivors have been asking for this for, and 2003 is a short end, for generations. The campuses knew these problems existed.
Rento is hopeful about what they can accomplish this year. She sees the audit as an opportunity.
We have so many people on campus doing good work on this, in this area, but to some extent they were all working separately, and the audit really forced us to get together and talk about what we're doing and collaborate and see how we can each help each other do a better job at what we're already doing.
As for the students, they begin a school year excited about the future and hopefully better informed. Angela Carone, KPBS News.
Video journalist Nick McVicker helped produce that story. And in coming weeks, Angela will have more on how universities are responding to assaults on campus. And you can find more of our coverage online at kpbs.org.
I'm Gwen Eiffel on the next news hour. Margaret Warner in Iraq and the $1 trillion burden of college student debt. That's Tuesday on the PBS NewsHour.
An environmental group is asking federal regulators to shut down California's last operational nuclear plant because of earthquake worries. Friends of the Earth was one of the groups that campaigned against San Onofre. They're now focusing on Diablo Canyon on the Central Coast, California's last reactor. Today, they filed a petition asking the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for a hearing on the plant's safety. The request comes a day after reports that an NRC inspector is urging a shutdown for a safety review. His recommendation came a year ago, and now the Senate plans a hearing on how the NRC responded.
Buildings cracked and crumbled during Sunday's earthquake in Napa. The U.S. Geological Survey put the temblor's financial toll at $1 billion. How would San Diego's structures fare in an earthquake, and when might the big one come? To get at the answers, I'm joined by Mehdi Shadyab, Senior Structural Engineer with the City of San Diego, and Kim Olson, Professor of Geological Sciences at San Diego State University. Professor Olson, the West Napa Fault is being blamed for Sunday's earthquake. How dangerous is this fault?
Well, it's a relatively small fault, a strike-slip fault where the two sides are sliding next to each other like the San Andreas Fault. It was mapped surface rupture on the fault yesterday by the U.S. Geological Survey along about 10-kilometer, 6-mile stretch on a known part of the fault, and also a previously unknown part of the fault where the earthquake jumped to the east and then continued northward. So partly on the known structure and partly on an unknown part of the fault.
Are there any similarities between the West Napa Fault and the Rose Canyon Fault, which runs through downtown San Diego, through La Jolla, and up the north coast?
Sure, there's many similarities. Both faults are what's called strike-slip faults, where the two sides slide next to each other, and they're both capable of generating magnitude 6 for the Rose Canyon, even up to 7 and larger earthquakes.
And Mehdi, I want to move on to you. The Napa earthquake damaged scores of buildings. Several of them had been retrofitted. How vulnerable is San Diego to this kind of damage?
Well, we have, by looking at the pictures on television, I haven't had a chance to go and evaluate those buildings, but by looking at those pictures, we have similar type buildings that were built at the early part of the 20th century, primarily in early 1900s. Because of that fact, the state of California legislation required all municipalities and along this in the entire state of California to basically take an inventory of those type of buildings and basically put a measure in effect that prevents them from collapsing in an event of an earthquake. In 2000, we passed an ordinance. It's called Unreinforced Masonry Ordinance, or for short URM Ordinance, which basically required the owners of this type of buildings, which have load-bearing walls that are constructed out of brick, block, or hollow clay tile, and they were built prior to March 24, 1939, to immediately brace the parapets of the buildings and also tie the roof plane and the walls and the perimeters together, so in the event of an earthquake, it doesn't immediately collapse, allows the occupants to escape being harmed.
So how many of these buildings in San Diego have been reinforced, and how many remain?
Well, we did a lot by ordinance, through enforcement, and many on the voluntary side from the owners. We had an inventory of over 800 buildings. Out of these 800 buildings, about a quarter of them were determined to be subject to this ordinance. They are retrofitted. It means the minimum mandatory provisions of the ordinance. The remaining were either determined not to be an unreinforced masonry buildings because they had other lateral load-resisting elements in place, or many of them got demolished, and many of them got fully retrofitted.
Professor Olson, there's a 99% chance that there will be a 6.7 earthquake or higher in Southern California over the next 30 years. What do simulations show about the consequences of such an earthquake here?
Well, a 6.7 on the Rose Canyon Fault, for that matter, would be very destructive because it runs right through a very built environment in La Jolla and downtown.
And we're looking at the simulation now.
Okay, I have focused with my simulations on large earthquakes on the San Andreas Fault in particular, where we can expect magnitude 7.5 up to 8. It's very overdue for the southern segment of the San Andreas, which hasn't ruptured for more than 330 years, and the frequency of large earthquakes on the San Andreas is about 150 years. So you can see it's clearly overdue.
Professor Olson, Mehdi, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us here.
No live broadcast of the Chargers' final preseason game this Thursday night. The team fell short in ticket sales, so the game's going to be on tape delay. KFMB will air it at 10 p.m., 3 hours after kickoff. The Chargers will play the Arizona Cardinals. Starting quarterback Phillip Rivers is taking the night off. The Bolts have 1 win and 2 losses so far in the preseason. There's going to be a little extra kick in the end of summer surf off the coast of San Diego. People planning to spend time in the water are being asked to be careful as the waves grow larger and rip currents get stronger over the next couple of days. Lifeguard Bill Bender says there is the potential for life-threatening conditions.
There is a hurricane that's coming up from Baja. It's called Hurricane Marie, extremely strong storm headed out to the northwest, and it should be approaching a window that should generate some pretty large surf for San Diego coastline.
The bigger waves will be noticed along south-facing beaches. Bender says people should only swim in areas where a lifeguard is present. He encourages people to talk to the lifeguard before they get into the water. And Bender says the lifeguards are there to help if a rip current causes a problem.
If you find yourself being pulled out, getting farther away from shore, having trouble swimming back in, it's best to swim sideways. And if you can't swim sideways, just raise your hand, float on your back, wave your arm. Lifeguards will be out to help you.
San Diego surfer Tyler Hawk was out at Tourmaline Surf Park with a friend. He says the water has been warmer than usual this summer, and he's looking for a good week of surfing as summer winds down. Hawk has already noticed there's a little extra juice in the waves.
Well, it is bigger in size, especially during the summer, because we usually get smaller waves. But like I said, it's strong out there.
National Weather Service officials say there is a chance of flooding along the coast. They're also warning about sneaker waves. Those are unexpectedly large waves that can wash over jetties, rocks, and even beaches. Warm weather is ahead for the coast. Look for temperatures in the low 80s at the beaches, low 90s for the inland valleys, with a little bit of cooling on Friday. Mountain temperatures will also be in the low to mid 80s. and desert temperatures climbing well above 100 degrees by Friday. Recapping tonight's top stories, a former San Diego City College student reportedly died over the weekend fighting for the extremist group Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. 33-year-old Douglas MacArthur McCain was reportedly in a battle with rival Islamic groups in Syria. San Diego City Council will not appeal an adverse ruling on the funding plan to expand the downtown convention center. Earlier this month, a judge struck down a hotel tax intended to pay for the project. City Council President Todd Gloria says the decision means they'll have to find a way to pay for the project or find a new one. And protesters greeted Mexico's president during his visit to San Diego today. They're demanding the release of Marine veteran Andrew Tamarisi from a Mexican prison. He was arrested last spring for bringing guns across the border. President Enrique Peña Nieto has not talked about the case. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks very much for joining us. We hope you have a great evening.